Alright, so we've talked about everything. We've talked about central metabolism. We've talked about, well, the electron transport chain, everything stemming from our glycolytic pathways. We've talked about breaking down proteins. We've talked about synthesizing amino acids. We've talked about breaking down amino acids. Now what we're going to talk about is nucleotide biosynthesis. And we're going to break this down, we're going to break it down a little bit so that we start out with, well, our purines versus our pyrimidines. The first thing that you need to remember is that your pyrimidines are going to be your C and T, whereas your purines are going to be your A and G. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out with our purines. Now here is basically our nitrogenous base structure, and this identifies where all of the different atoms within this structure are coming from. So we start out here with our nitrogen, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, and this 9 right here is where we would connect to our sugar. Okay, so we've got sources that are kind of all over the map. We've got aspartate, glycine, and glutamine that are contributing atoms. We've got formate that's contributing atoms, and then we've got a CO2 that's going to be contributing an atom. So we've got amino acids that are contributing, as well as formate and, or specifically formal THF and carbon dioxide. Now the first reaction in all of this that we really need to be familiar with is this reaction that takes alpha D ribose 5-phosphate R5P and phosphorylates it with the enzyme ribose phosphate pyrophosphokinase. Now one thing that's important to note about this is we're making, first of all, which I'm going to highlight this molecule, this 5-phosphoribosyl alpha pyrophosphate, also known as PRPP. This is an important molecule. Think about this as our first, arguably, this is our first molecule in purine biosynthesis. Okay, so that this molecule is going to come back a couple times. We're going to talk about it a little bit more down the way. But what we've got is we've got our sugar. We need to add our nitrogenous base. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to doubly phosphorylate it. One thing that's worth noting about this specific kinase is we're bringing ATP. We're transferring both of our phosphates in the form of pyrophosphate onto our ribose, and we're leaving behind AMP. Okay, so that PRPP, or 5-phosphoribosyl alpha pyrophosphate, PRPP, is going to undergo a transaminase reaction. We're going to take our nitrogen off our glutamine side chain, the NH2 from our R group. We're going to add water. We're going to remove our pyrophosphate. When we deaminate the R group of glutamine and replace it with, well, our, when we leave in its place a carboxylic acid, we form glutamate. Okay, so wouldn't you know it, after we've talked about almost nothing but transamination reactions with our amino acid metabolism, once we get into nucleotide metabolism, lo and behold, our second reaction is a transamination reaction. So glutamine's R group contributes this nitrogen that ends up on our molecule PRA, beta 5-phosphoribosylamine. Okay, so that enzyme, amidophosphorybosyl transferase, catalyzes that reaction. Now, this PRPP is where we were. That's kind of our starting point. We did a transamination reaction, TA is what I'm going to call it, once we got that transamination reaction, we needed to start building out our nitrogenous base. We really don't even care about the sugar. That's just kind of implied. And from here on out, we're just going to identify our sugar with an R group, R, and so on. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a glycine molecule, an ATP, we're going to basically use the C termini of our glycine residue in order to make a bond between our nitrogen on our 5-phospho-beta-D ribosylamine, and we're going to put, well, that glycine on there, okay? In order to do that, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to hydrolyze a phosphodiester bond between our beta and our gamma phosphates. So we're using ADP and PI as our products. ATP goes in, we break that bond in order to form this bond right here. So that's going to give us glycinamide ribonucleotide, or GAR. Okay, the next thing that we're going to use is this molecule known as N10-formyl H4 folate. So this N10 formyl group, or this molecule right here, this is very similar to what we've previously seen. We saw that N5N10 THF. And we saw that when we were talking about the serine threonine dehydratase enzyme. What that was going to use, or what that was using, was that was transferring one CH2. So that CH2, so this THF is a carrier of carbons, or like a single carbon. And this one in particular is a carrier of folate. And we're going to add that folate right here on what was the N-termini of our glycine residue, and we're going to make this formyl glycinamide ribonucleotide, FGAR. Okay, so then what we're going to use is we're going to use glutamine, and we're going to do aminotransferase, and we're going to put in place of this carbonyl oxygen right there, we're going to put an NH. We're going to use ATP to produce ADP and PI and make formyl glycinamide ribonucleotide, or FGAM. So we've removed that carbonyl oxygen in favor of this NH. Now, in our fifth step, we're going to cyclize our reaction, or we're going to cyclize our molecule, and we're using the enzyme FGAM cyclase. We're closing our ring in, and of our two ring structures, this produces our first completed ring. Okay, so after that, this AIR, we're starting back up here. Now this AIR, what we have to do is use AIR carboxylate, or this AIR is either going to go the route of the 6A reaction or the 6 reaction. If it goes the route of the 6A reaction, well then we're going to be adding CO2 directly to this nitrogen that we most recently added. Now, if it goes the route of C, what's going to happen is we're going to, or sorry, that's the, I'm sorry, if we add the CO2, if it goes the route of C, 6A, we're going to be adding the CO2 right up here at the top, farther away from our R group. Okay, if we go the route of C, of 6, it's going to be adding the CO2 directly onto our nitrogen that we most recently added. In either event, we have to basically, we're going to be adding, in either event, we do have to have a carbon there, but what's important to distinguish between these is, well, what organism are we talking about? So if you go the route of 6A, that's what higher eukaryotes do. Whereas the route of 6 to 7, that is what plants, bacteria, and fungi do. So what they're going to do is they're going to add that carbon dioxide, but then they have to use this N5CAR mutase to move it to that position that's further from your sugar. Now, 6A for higher eukaryotes, they can just add CO2 directly in that position, so they bypass that mutase step. Okay, now once we have that, what we're going to do is we're going to use the enzyme SAICAR synthetase. SAICAR or SICAR is N-succinyl 5-aminoimidazole 4-carboxamide ribonucleotide. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be using our N-termini from our aspartate residue to make a bond with that carbon that we just recently added. We're going to be removing an oxygen in favor of that. So now what we have is our other nitrogen within that ring, which is kind of one of the things that we're concerned with. Now, we just added an aspartate. It took ATP in order to do that reaction. And what we're going to be able to do is use a lyase to remove basically everything but that nitrogen. So we're going to break a carbon-nitrogen bond, releasing fumarate. So now we've got 5-aminoimidazole 4-carboxamide ribonucleotide, also known as ICAR. Now, if you ever know someone who's like a very competitive athlete, it's entirely possible that they'll be taking ICAR as a nutritional supplement. And there are some studies that showed that it did have like a significant impact on endurance athletes, supplementation of it. At any rate, that ICAR, then what we're going to use with that is we're again going to use we're going to be adding a folate molecule. So we're adding basically the same carbon double bonded to an oxygen with a hydrogen. But now what we're doing is we're adding it to this nitrogen at the bottom of our ring. So the last step is to remove some H2O. Lo and behold, we've closed in our ring. Now, by closing in our ring, we've made kind of our basic molecule that we can modify in any number of different ways to make either those purines that we're most familiar with, A and G, meaning guanine, or purine derivatives. But this molecule is inosynate, or IMP, inosynate monophosphate. Okay, so that inosynate monophosphate, in order to get to our A and our G, what we've got to do is we've got to go down two different pathways, one of which is with adenylosuccinate synthetase, where we're going to transfer an aspartate on with the help of GTP. We're going to transfer that aspartate onto the top of our ring, and so now that gives us adenylosuccinate. We're going to release our fumarate, again using a lyase enzyme, but this is adenylosuccinate lyase. Whenever we do that, all that we're left with is that single NH2 on the top of our six-membered ring. Okay, we'll use that IMP as our foundation for making GMP. In order to do that, we've got to use IMP dehydrogenase, because what we're targeting now is this carbon right here. What we've got to do is put a double bonded oxygen or a carbonyl oxygen on it. And then what we're going to do is we will have made xanthocene monophosphate, or XMP. We're going to use glutamine, ATP, H2O, and the enzyme glutamine synthetase to simply add an NH2. Okay, so effectively what we're doing is another transamination reaction, because this glutamine has an R group nitrogen that we're going to be transferring onto to make our GMP molecule. So the difference between these is actually amazingly simple. It's kind of funny whenever you're tasked with learning what these structures are, it's kind of daunting, and it's like, okay, well, is this here, is this here, is this here? But if you know where it's coming from, and by that I mean if you know that AMP and GMP are both originating from IMP, well, in one case what you're doing is adding an NH2 to the top of the ring, which would be sorry, that would be carbon number 6. So C6, or you're adding it to carbon number 2. With the case of AMP, what you're doing is adding it to carbon number 6, and with GMP, you're adding it to carbon number 2. So whenever you understand that, it makes it a little bit easier to process. Okay. Now, the regulation of purine synthesis is kind of complicated. So we've got a series of arrows. Green arrows mean it's activating. The red arrows mean, or the red dotted lines indicate that that's inhibiting. Okay, so when we have ribose 5-phosphate, remember that's our starting point. When you have that ribose 5-phosphate, what you're needing to do is you are needing to add your pyrophosphate in order to make PRPP. Okay, so what is going to inhibit that step conversion of basically the addition of a pyrophosphate molecule onto ribose 5-phosphate? Well, the presence of your diphosphates, well actually, heck, your diphosphate of adenine, your diphosphate of guanine. Okay, now basically ADP, GDP, those are both going to inhibit that step. Okay, if you do not, or if you have low concentrations of GDP and ADP, well then you're going to be able to make it onto PRPP, which is going to activate the next step in the process, which is our generation of our beta-5-phosphoribosylamine. Okay, so that is going to activate basically itself. It's kind of going to fulfill its own destiny. Well, if you actually have any of your completed products, you've got a negative feedback loop. So AMP, ADP, ATP, GMP, GDP, GTP, those are both going to inhibit the production of 5-phosphoribosylamine. Okay, now it's worth noting your your completed nucleotides will inhibit your continued production of your nucleotides, but where it's actually stopping it is kind of a little bit more complicated. Okay, then what we have is, well, AMP. That is going to inhibit the conversion of adenylosuccinate to our, that's going to inhibit the enzyme adenylosuccinate synthetase. So it's going to be inhibiting its own production, or the preceding step's own production. GMP does the exact same thing. It's going to inhibit the production of xanthocene monophosphate. Xanthine monophosphate is also going to be inhibiting the production of the 5-phosphoribosylamine, which kind of makes me think that, well, this process, the reason that you don't have the analogous molecule adenylosuccinate inhibiting this step is because, well, this is a good way to basically regulate when one of the pathways is on. If you think about production of adenylosuccinate and XMP as constantly taking place, well, and if you need to at any point regulate it, well, add XMP, and that's going to control it. Likewise, when you think about your kind of energy currency, ATP is it. ATP is your most common energy currency. So that's something that you can imagine would need to be kind of constitutively or consistently always available. All right, well, I hope this was helpful, and have a good one.